Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the very strange case of Abel Atherton and the murder of Elizabeth Patrick, which took place in Gateshead in 1909. I hope you will find it interesting. Abel Atherton was born in Wigan in around 1879. His parents are unknown. However, by 1881, Abel was living with his grandparents, Abel and Ellen, and was still living with them in 1891. He would later move to the Gateshead area where he worked as a miner and lodged at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Patrick at Chopwell. He was not described by anyone as being someone who was fond of the drink. Elizabeth Patrick, the victim, was born in Towlaw in around 1877. Her parents were possibly Joseph and Mary. She was married to Jacob and the couple had at least 4 children, one being a daughter called Frances. The couple, like many people at the time, occasionally took in lodgers, and Abel Atherton had been living with them until a few weeks before the crime was committed. Before we go any further, can I just say if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. It really is appreciated, and it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And as always, I just want to add that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. This story is one which had very little detail, so it may sound somewhat different to my normal writing style. Abel Atherton had lodged with the Patrick family in Thames Street in Chopwell in Gateshead since around 1907. It seems he had lived quite happily with them until sometime in 1909, when he took an interest in their daughter Frances, who was around 15 years old at the time. Although there was no suggestion of any improper behaviour, he had attempted to persuade Frances to be his sweetheart. However, as Abel was much older, he was around 29 years old at the time, Frances had rejected his advances. This did not put Abel off, and he continued with his intentions until both Jacob and Elizabeth Patrick said they would not put up with his behaviour anymore and asked him to leave the house. Abel did leave and went to lodge in another house close by in Chopwell, but he still frequently went to the Patricks' home to try and see Frances. The family were quite fed up with him, and it seems this made Abel quite angry. At around 6:30 p.m. on August the 11th, 1909, Abel turned up at the Patrick's house carrying a gun under his arm. When Elizabeth saw him at the door, she shouted at him that he would not be using the gun there. She then ran towards him and tried to take the gun from his hands. A struggle took place and a shot was heard, but no one was hit. A second shot rang out a moment later, and Elizabeth cried out that she had been shot in the leg. She fell to the ground and died just a few moments later. Abel then attempted to cut his own throat, but the pocket knife he used caused nothing more than a scratch. He then walked off in the direction of the town, meeting P.C. Coulson, who was heading towards the Patrick's home. Abel stopped him and told him he was the man he was looking for. He was then taken to Bladen Police Station, where he was later charged with the willful murder of Elizabeth Patrick. The inquest in this case proved impossible to find, and the details of the court hearing are also quite basic. The court hearing was held in mid-August at Gateshead Police Courts. No details were given as to who had identified the body of Elizabeth Patrick, but I think we can assume it would have been her husband. Frances Patrick said she was 15 years old and lived with her parents at Thames Street. She said that Abel Atherton had lodged with them for around 2 years. He had made suggestions to her about them becoming a couple, but she said she had always rejected him as he was too old. She was asked if this had annoyed him or made him angry, and at first she simply said he had not been happy, then added that he had been very angry about it. Jacob Patrick said he was a miner and lived at Chopwell in Gateshead. He said Elizabeth was his wife and Frances was his daughter. He said Abel had lodged with them quite happily for the first year or so, until he began to take an interest in Frances. Jacob said he was not happy about this, and although Frances had rejected him, this had not put him off. He said he told Abel that he would have to leave the house, adding that if Abel had not left, he would have sent his daughter away. He said Abel did leave and found lodgings elsewhere, but still came to their house from time to time. There had been some rumours started by Abel after he had left, saying that Jacob had behaved inappropriately with his daughter. However, Jacob said Abel had never accused him of this, and when asked he said if he had said such things it would not have been true. He had a very normal and good relationship with his daughter. Joseph Patrick said he was 14 years old and lived with his family in Thames Street. He said he had been at home on the evening when Abel had come to the house with the gun. He said he believed that Abel had been holding the gun when both shots were fired, but he thought his mother was also holding the gun when the first shot was fired. Mrs. Marley said she was a neighbour and friend of Elizabeth Patrick and had been in their home when Abel had knocked at the door on the 11th. She said when he arrived he did not really see anything, just asked how they all were. She said Elizabeth saw the gun and said, "You will not use that gun here." She said Elizabeth then rushed at Abel and tried to get the gun off him. She said Elizabeth had her back to her, so she could not clearly see and did not know if Elizabeth had hold of the gun when it was fired. She said the two had struggled for a few moments and had been quite close together. She said when the second shot was fired, she heard Elizabeth say, "I have been shot in the leg." She then fell to the floor. Mrs. Marley said she died in minutes with no time for a doctor to be sent for. Mary Crudders said she was 15 years old and lived near the Patricks in Gateshead. She said on the night of the 11th she saw Elizabeth near the door of her home. She did not say what was happening, but she said she saw her jump back and shout, "Oh, my leg." She said a few moments later someone, she did not know who, threw the gun out into the street. Isabella Foster said she also lived in Chopwell in Gateshead. She said Abel had come to lodge with her after he left the Patricks. She said one time he had spoken to her and said it was a good job he had left their house before he had done something stupid. She said he had also shown her some cartridges for his gun, saying one was for Frances, one was for her father, and another was for himself. She said he was drunk at the time, so she did not take any notice. She said he did keep a gun in her house, and she remembered him taking it out on the 11th, saying he was going to do some shooting practice. P.C. Coulson said he had been told of an incident at the Patrick's home on August the 11th and was heading to their house when he met Abel. He said he told him, "I am the man you want. She is quite dead. It is a pity I did not finish myself as well." He said he took Abel to the police station, and when he was searched he had a pocket knife and some gun cartridges in his possession. He said when he was later charged with the willful murder of Elizabeth Patrick, Abel had said, "The knife was not sharp enough for me to use, and the other was a pure accident. She fired one shot in the air, and the other she shot herself in the leg." Inspector Dryden said that Abel had made the following statement to him: "There is one thing that consoles me. I did not shoot her. She shot herself. I had been told someone at work was looking to buy a gun and I was going to sell it to him. On the way there, I went to the Patrick's house. I was just going to frighten them. She took the gun from me and shot herself. The gun went off in the air the first time and she shot herself with the second shot. I would have stopped her, but the daughter had hold of me and Mrs. Marley stood in my way." Dr. Bulkeley of Chopwell said he had been called to the home of the Patricks on the night of the 11th. He said Elizabeth was already dead when he arrived. He said it was his opinion that the gun had been fired at very close range. Although it was not stated if Dr. Bulkeley had performed the post-mortem on the body of Elizabeth Patrick, it was stated that the cause of death had been blood loss due to the bullet wound severing one of the main arteries in Elizabeth's leg. Although the jury at the inquest had already found Abel guilty of willful murder, Mr. Clark, who would be representing Abel at his trial, spoke to the magistrates at the court hearing to state that there was no clear proof that Abel had intended to kill Elizabeth. It was, he said, clearly an accident due to Elizabeth taking hold of the gun. Abel had simply wanted to frighten the family who would upset him. Abel then spoke, saying that it was a pure accident, he did not intend to kill anyone. And he was asked how he felt the murder had occurred, and he stated it was during the struggle Elizabeth fired the gun and shot herself. Regardless of all this, the magistrates then formally charged Abel and he was committed for trial on a charge of the willful murder of Elizabeth Patrick. The funeral of Elizabeth Patrick took place on August the 14th at Towlaw Cemetery. It was said that a large crowd gathered to pay their respects as the hearse travelled from the family home to the cemetery. The service was conducted by the Reverend Hanson. Although it was not stated, it would appear that the burial was a family only. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Elizabeth anywhere in the cemetery. The trial took place on both the 11th and 12th of November at Durham before Mr. Justice Walton. Abel Atherton pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder. The majority of the evidence is the same as that already given. However, there was quite a lot of new evidence at the trial as follows. Joseph Patrick now stated that he had been in the kitchen at home when Abel had come into their house. He said he had the gun under his arm. It was pointing towards the ground. He said his mother shouted at him, saying, "You are not going to use that here." He said she ran towards Abel to take the gun from him. He said he did not say anything else as he ran out of the house. He said once outside he heard the first shot. It was fired into the street. He said he then ran up the street, and as he was running he heard the second shot. He said as he looked back he saw Abel throw the gun into the street and saw his mother lying on the ground. This was slightly different to the inquest when he had claimed to see both his mother and Abel holding the gun. Mrs. Keegan said she lived close to the Patricks in Thames Street. She said she heard the shots fired and saw Elizabeth fall to the ground. She said she then saw Abel come to the door holding the gun. He threw it into the street. He then went over to Elizabeth and bent down towards her. She thought he may have kissed her on the cheek. He then began to walk away. She said she went over to Elizabeth and gave her a drink. She said she died a few moments later. Mrs. Irwin said she saw Elizabeth lying in the street, but she did not say anything else. She said Abel came towards her and she said, "You villain, what have you done?" She said Abel took a knife from his pocket and attempted to cut his own throat in front of her. She said this scared her and she ran away. Margaret Thompson said Elizabeth was her sister. She said she saw Abel on the night of the 11th of August. She said she asked him what he had done to Elizabeth and he said he did not know. She said she told him she would kill him for what he had done, and she said he offered her the pocket knife, saying, "Take this and finish me." She said she did not do anything and he walked away. Mr. Pape, a gunsmith of Newcastle, said he believed it would be impossible for Elizabeth to have shot herself during the struggle. He said the gun would only go off if someone pulled the trigger, and she'd been not near to the trigger when it was fired, so it must have been someone else who fired the fatal shot. Abel Atherton then gave evidence. He stated he had lodged with the Patrick family in Chopwell for 2 years. He said they all got on well until he fell in love with Frances. He said she did not want him and told him if he did not move out, then she would. He said he left and got new lodgings. He said this left him without much money, so he decided to sell his shotgun. He said he had to pass the Patricks' home on his way to sell the gun, and he decided to call in and see them as he often did. He said he had no intention of shooting anyone. The gun was under his arm when he went into the kitchen, and he said as soon as he entered the house, Elizabeth rushed at him and tried to take the gun from him. He said he never pointed the gun at her and he never pulled the trigger. He said he could not say how the gun had gone off because he definitely didn't pull the trigger. When he saw Elizabeth on the ground, he took it and threw it outside the gun. He said he then went over to her and bent down and kissed her cheek. He said it was true that he had later tried to take his own life. It was what he deserved for not removing the cartridges from the gun. When asked, he said he really did not know how the gun went off. He said Elizabeth took it off him and it went off. The prosecution at this asked Abel, was it not true that after the first shot had been fired, he had taken the gun back, pointed it at Elizabeth and shot her? Abel said this was not true. The prosecution then stated, so you say you are not responsible for this crime? Abel said he was not, adding, I am as innocent as you are. I did not find any details of the prosecution summing up or any details from the defence or the judge. I think, however, we can assume that the defence would have continued with their suggestion that this was an accidental death, and no doubt the prosecution would have stated that it was not possible for Elizabeth to shoot herself. The jury, after retiring for a short time, returned a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Abel Atherton. The judge then sentenced Abel to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the grounds of Durham Prison. Abel simply replied by saying, "I am innocent." Abel's solicitor almost immediately put in an appeal for another trial on the grounds that the gun was accidentally fired due to the struggle, and that Abel should not have been found guilty of wilful murder. The Lord Chief Justice at the hearing stated that it had been heard that Abel had previously threatened to attack the Patrick family, and also made some suggestion that Abel had tried to buy a revolver before the crime took place, ending by saying the case had been very fairly conducted, and the appeal was then rejected. After this, a petition was sent to the Home Secretary asking for a reprieve of the sentence to one of penal servitude for life. While Abel was awaiting the outcome of this petition, he wrote to his father, saying that he hoped that something would happen for the best. He said he felt it was wrong that those who had been there on the day had not told the truth. They knew he had not pulled the trigger. He ended by saying if Mrs. Patrick had not tried to take the gun from him, and if Francis and Mrs. Marley had not interfered, the accident would never have happened, and he would have been looking forward to a happy Christmas. He signed the letter, "Your innocent son." The Home Secretary, Herbert Gladstone, stated that he could not see any grounds to interfere in the due course of the law. He said the execution would go ahead as planned on December the 8th, 1909. During his time in prison, Abel Atherton was said to be a quiet and well-behaved prisoner who had protested his innocence at every chance he got. On the night before the execution, it was said that he slept well and arose very early the next morning, and he was attended by the Reverend Jacob, the prison chaplain. The executioner was Henry Pierpoint, and he quickly pinioned Abel Atherton, which means his hands were tied either behind his back or in front of them. Abel was then led to the scaffold. He was said to walk calmly and firmly, and once in view of the scaffold and the waiting reporters, it was said he walked with his head held high. Pierpoint placed Abel on the drop and was about to place the white cap over his head when Abel, in a low, deep voice, said, "You are hanging an innocent man." This, it seems, did have some effect on Pierpoint, and he moved very quickly to place the white cap over Abel's head, adjust the rope, and step back and quickly gave the signal to remove the bolt, and Abel fell. His death was said to be instant. Right until the end, Abel claimed innocence and never confessed to the murder of Elizabeth Patrick. After the execution, the waiting reporters were allowed to step forward and view the body below the scaffold, and after the usual time of 1 hour, the body was removed, placed in a plain coffin, and later buried within the grounds of Durham Prison. It was said that a notice had been placed on the prison gates to announce that the execution had taken place as required by law, but the weather being quite bad, it was snowing. Barely anyone in the area had come to view the details of the notice. I found this to be a very strange case. Although it is clear that Abel had taken the gun to the home of the Patricks, it's not clear that he had intended to shoot anyone with it. He had been heard by his current landlady to say that he would shoot them, but as he was drunk at the time, and he did not make any effort to go to their house when he said it, this could surely not be taken as a genuine threat. It seems very much like a case where the sight of the gun under his arm had alarmed Elizabeth Patrick, and she felt he did intend to attack them all, and this made her try to take the gun from him. In the struggle, the gun went off twice, but in all honesty, it truly does feel that the gun was only fired due to the struggle. Abel had not pointed the gun at anyone, or even appeared as if he was going to do so. He simply called into the house and asked how everyone was. It also seems that Francis and Mrs. Marley may have been involved in the struggle with the gun, although we only have Abel's word for this, but it would have made a very confusing situation where anything could have happened without intention. Yes, he was foolish to think a young girl of 15 would be interested in his advances, but he had left the house when he'd been asked to do so, and this had made him angry, but again, it does not seem like enough of a motive for murder. If he had wanted to harm the family, then surely he would have done so before he moved out. It seemed to me that in the struggle for the gun on that fateful day, it was fired by accident. Abel claiming to have not pulled the trigger, perhaps because he simply could not remember doing so, or did not know that he had, and felt that the whole thing had been down to Elizabeth. No one actually saw him pull the trigger either, and in the confusion, it is true to say that it could have been down to anyone. Although I think we have to be honest and say, as the gun was a shotgun, Elizabeth could not have pulled the trigger herself. Were the jury correct to find him guilty of willful murder? Well, I honestly don't think they were. I think this should have been a case of manslaughter, as they heard no real evidence that he had intended to kill, and the fact that the gun went off during the struggle is again more of a case of manslaughter than murder. If he had entered the house pointing the gun at the family and said he would shoot them, then I would probably think differently, but he didn't, and I honestly don't think he should have been sentenced to death. But what do you think? Do you think he planned to go to the house that day and shoot the family? Do you think he had always planned to kill them based on what he was supposed to have said to his new landlady? Or do you think the whole sad story was truly an accident, as Abel himself had claimed, and that he may well have pulled the trigger but did not truly know that he had done so? Do you think the jury were correct to find him guilty of willful murder and to sentence him to death, or should there have been some element of doubt and a verdict of manslaughter? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope you have found this very strange, sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again next week.